Hello there. My name is Joaquin Melara, and this is the AI Digest podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about living systems, how collective solutions create resilient communities. And who better to talk to us about this than Shannon Dubs? Uh, Mr. Dubs, Shannon, would you like to give us a little introduction into who you are, what you do, what you've done, where you've come from, whatever you want to share? I think that'll set the context of the conversation.
Sure thing, Joaquin. Thanks for having me on your show. This is an awesome opportunity to be able to share kind of our a background and a story that's unfolding in real time. My name is Shannon Dobbs. I am the founder of Fellowship of Living Systems, and I'm also the co-founder of a new nonprofit organization called the Regenerative Impact Alliance. And we'll talk about how those things fold together. Got my story started about probably 30 years ago when I joined the Army at the age of 19 as a college dropout out of Los Angeles, right in the middle of the LA riots, and ended up in basic training right after that whole situation happened. Got a really interesting story about watching a grocery store get protected from rioters by the National Guard and three ministers from the local community who stood vigil to protect this vital resource from being burned down so that the community would have access to retail food. So that was a really early education in my mind about how kind of our system works and how logistics work, even before I got into the military. Then I spent 4 years in North Carolina learning logistics and systems thinking, and a lot of like civil affairs is basically like building and aligning and coalition building with allies overseas. So I had an opportunity to really kind of see how things like this work on the ground. And then after I got in the military, I got into small business entrepreneurism, ended up running bars and nightclubs up in Northern Nevada for a bunch of years, and got to apply the things that I'd learned in both community building and entrepreneurship, and really kind of figuring out ways to weave those two types of strategies together to be able to create a very powerful entrepreneurial approach that ended up, making us extremely successful in the market. We figured out collaboration strategies instead of competition, so we bring other bar owners together and create opportunities like pub crawls, where people would come down to the neighborhood and then we would all get to kind of share the customers. So it grew the size of the pie, and we would collaborate with the health department and do different handouts of types of things that people would need, like condoms, that kind of thing, and just really became part of the community's fabric. And so we kind of changed how business works in that area. Later on, after I got out of business and sold mine, I ended up getting into the nonprofit worlds. Spent a bunch of years figuring out how we can apply entrepreneurial strategies to social challenges in different ways to be able to attract different types of funding, be able to solve challenges by creating business to business approaches versus, like donation and charity and kind of scarcity mindset. And we've really come a long way in developing coordination strategies that actually empower communities to be able to step up and solve and handle their own challenges. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Well, that's a very terse uh, recap of everything you've done. Maybe we can zoom into some of these things.
We might have to dig into one or two of them, yeah.
Uh, I know. Well, I can only imagine that one of the motivations for people tuning in today is understanding how AI weaves into all these things. But in order for us to productively talk about that, I think we need to set the backdrop in all these different chapters in your life and how they've kind of coalesced to give you the unique capabilities to execute this kind of operation. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your military occupation and some of the things that you learned about community building through that, and
Mhm.
then from there we can take it to the bar in Reno.
Yeah, I think that's really important because what was going on back in the '90s is it was kind of a decade of peace that we got to enjoy here in the United States. And so I joined in '92 and spent my active duty career kind of during that period in between the endless wars. And so we were really focused on ally building and really kind of bringing communities together and developing capacity so that legitimate spaces were able to flourish and thrive. And I was involved in some operations where we were literally like building schools and digging wells and helping communities to kind of bootstrap themselves out of a situation of not being functional and kind of get on their feet and be able to actually like move forward. a lot of that infrastructure ended up being critical to be able to program around it and for communities to be able to kind of develop a forward motion instead of just circling the drain. And one of the things that was really helpful in that job was having an entire battalion of people who were specially trained in helping us get our message out. So we would have graphic artists, we would have copywriters, we would have all these different people who knew how to kind of, create this narrative and how to put it on a piece of paper and how to throw it out of an airplane or whatever it is that we were doing that week. And that we kind of took it for granted that we would come up with the ideation, we would create the strategy, and then the implementers would do the implementation. Fast forward into business, and I got to really understand the other side of that and realize, okay, this is how I have to position myself in marketing, and this is how I have to present the business, and this is how we have to kind of do our outreach. And it's a different type of outreach, but it's really essentially what we all call marketing. And it was very difficult for me to do that transition because the websites are hard, and I've got a head injury from a parachuting accident in '95, and so I struggle with code, and I struggle with following steps in the kitchen or in any types of these situations. And so I've kind of continually been beating my head against this wall of the technological kind of barriers and the need for expert support pretty much ever since I got out of the military. And that's expressed, like I basically figured out a lot of solutions and a lot of ways to address that in different ways. But there's been some really big challenges that I've never really been able to figure out how to overcome. So fast forward all the way here, I've gone through the business and marketing and entrepreneurship side. I've been very successful. I've been able to figure out some workarounds and gone through. Then I get into advocacy, and that's a whole kind of it's another frame of the same game. So now you're trying to reach out to community, you're trying to get support, you're trying to develop relationships, you're trying to connect with sponsors, you're trying to grow your network. So it's kind of the same game, but for a different reason. And I started seeing that not only was I struggling with the same challenges of constantly having to beg for help from people who were too busy making their own money and dealing with their own stuff to be able to help you, and just constantly kind of being in this scarcity mindset of we don't have the tools we need to be able to solve these challenges or to even to coordinate with each other to try and figure out how to solve these challenges. And so about 4 years ago, I started writing books about my experiences in the nonprofit world. And the first book I wrote myself, and it took me about a year. And it's probably not a great book, but it does have some really good information about how to build a grocery store from scratch, how to build a community center and a community food hub, and how to make it cash flow positively so that you don't have to hemorrhage money like a supermarket would in a low-income community. And so it's a different business model that you can actually use to empower community with consistent food access. And then the challenge became how to translate that for communities that didn't have a frame of reference for that. And so that's always been, again, it's just been this repeated challenge throughout the years. And about 2 years ago, I started playing with AI, and I started looking at that automation possibility, and I wrote a second book using AI, and it was crap. But then a year later, I wrote a third book, and it was really good. And I took the first two and I put them together and synthesized it. And AI had gotten to the point where we were able to kind of really get in some new information. And all of a sudden, I had this tool that's like a 110-page tool that I could throw at somebody or have them download it off my website. And suddenly you've got a way to understand this and a way for me to really kind of lead with authority. And so that it changes the positioning of everything. Now we're getting to the point where AI has progressed to the point where anybody with a Google account can now do visual primers, can do explainer videos where they can actually translate complex topics into simple language that they can explain to their grandmothers in their own language. It gives you the opportunity to be able to create AI deep dive. So really that breakdown is the key from my perspective for community control of communications.
Before we go into the juicy parts, I still like to leave a little bit of mystery.
Sure.
I hear you. And working within communications and learning all the interrelated parts of effective communication, building awareness, campaigning, building strategic alliances, cooperatives, partnerships, all these things. It's such a interesting aspect of your identity to begin there, because that's the essence of all interpersonal, interorganizational activities, right? If you cannot communicate and you cannot align to the objectives that they want and the objectives that you want and target and align everybody to go in the same direction,
yeah,
most people have an idea and then it just fizzles out because they can't materialize it or communicate it in the world. So I think that's a really important part of what you've learned.
Mhm.
How about we talk a little bit about that Reno bar? I mean, I think that's a significant part of your
Yeah.
background. And
Well, it was kind of the reason I moved to Nevada, actually. So when I was still in the Army, I had gotten involved in warehouse parties in North Carolina. I was in this. There was this one nightclub that I absolutely loved, goth industrial punk bar called Neo, and me and my friends would go there all the time. And they had a cafe up on the second floor, and I wasn't a drinker, so I would sit up there with my coffee and a double espresso in hand, and I'd just be sketching out different designs for nightclubs that I wanted to run when I got out of the service. And so I was just so enamored with this idea, and I saw how the DJs would manipulate the crowd, and you'd see the movement, and like the floor would crash, everybody would get a drink, and then it'd start, getting the energy back up again. It just fascinated me. But I didn't want to be a DJ. I wanted to be the person that was running the club. I was kind of a theater geek back in the day. I was always on the stage crew in the back end, and so I've always been positioned of like, I don't want to be on stage. I want to be building the stage. And so when I had the opportunity to, me and my partner at the time, moved up to Northern Nevada, and we took over this old LGBT bar called Five Star Saloon that had been around since 1970. The place is older than I am. And, it was a dump, and it was totally trash, and it had been treated very poorly for years. And we took the place over and turned it around, dialed it back to an R rating, created a community vibe, cleaned the place up, and just completely changed and shifted how we positioned the location in the community. Started opening up to college students, getting on wine walks, getting involved with all kinds of cool community events, hooking up with the hospital down the street, doing HIV awareness events, like just anything that we could do to get involved. And that ended up blossoming into a deeper connection with the community. So then we started, doing collaborative events like pride events down the street and everything like that, and it just kind of blew up. So that's kind of how we got started through there. But I mean, it was awesome. It was 11 years of having my own dance floor.
but those 11 years also kind of trained your ear to listen for patterns and behavior, and need for providing resources and getting a pulse check on how life is going for a group of people within a certain proximity, right? Like that's what gave you the sixth sense in dealing with human empathy, uh, and kind of building these bridges. No, I mean that's kind of the essence of a community.
Well, it's even more than that. I learned how to manage chaos. A nightclub atmosphere is one of the most high pressure environments you could possibly have in business. You're managing security, bar staff, exterior elements, alcohol, all kinds of craziness. And you've got liabilities, you've got your insurance situations, you've got all of these different things that are moving constantly. You've got to be able to make sure the bar's stocked at the end of Saturday night when you get your thing, you get your deliveries on a Wednesday. You got to deal with what happens when the drunk starts taking people out and everybody's got a bomb. I mean, there's just craziness happening all the time. And you've got to understand how to navigate those social flows too. I mean, some of the people that used to come into our bar were Tongans. And if you ever have a crew of Tongans come into your place, like you want to make sure that you're negotiating that situation well, because it's a respect situation, in any type of situation like that. And so we had to figure out really kind of how do we navigate through this world that we're developing. And as we got more and more popular, and as the club itself started really blowing up, we started getting better and better at developing those relationships. So it was really kind of a growth experience, not just for me as an owner, but for everybody. And especially because of my disabilities, I was forced to navigate and negotiate with my own staff. It's like, listen, guys, I'm not going to be holding a shift. I won't be standing behind the bar ever. So every one of you has to be the manager of your own shift. Every one of you has to be responsible for the setting, and the theater production that is your shift. And so I would train them not just on how to do their job, but also on how to make more tips, also on how to basically treat it as a small business of their own. And so I kind of retreated into venue operator mode and let my staff really be the folks that were shining. And it ended up being their club. And then it became the community's club. And that was the difference.
That's an interesting perspective to nurture entrepreneurship within a platform, right? So that everybody can build beyond just a living, but also create that relationship, create the community. And you gave the layers, right? First, it's just operations, do the thing, but over a function of time, that's when you start to see the patterns. You get to see the people again. You get to see how they're shifting and making decisions in their life, and whether they're up or they're down. That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, and I brought them into my world too. Like I explained, like I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody upsells liquor, right? You go in there and it's like, I want the thing on the back bar that costs $50 a shot, and they're always trying to upsell you. Oh, do you want that super premium? Well, I was educating my staff. Listen, I pay $8.50 a bottle for premium well vodka. Why would we want to upcharge to something that I'm not going to make as much of a margin on? So just be really proud of our well, and we worked together to make sure that we were all really happy with what we had. So we had a scotch that scotch drinkers like. We had a vodka that vodka drinkers respect. And so we were always able to sit on that baseline, and that quality ended up being the through line that we became known for.
That's good. So from this Reno bar, you took it, you ran it for 11 years, and then you sold it. That got you into other larger kind of interorganizational activities for developing communities and partnerships and alliances and cooperatives. Is that right?
No, no, I completely fell butt backwards into all that. It was a complete accident. So, so here's what happened. I had been running a five-star saloon for I think 5 years, 6 years, something like that. Is coming up into 2011. Took it over in 2006, and I had this opportunity to take over a nightclub that had been operating a block away from me. And they'd gone out of business through mismanagement. And the situation came out that the space, this giant 20,000 square foot entertainment facility, this nightclub that had been called 210 North, was available. It was on the market. And not only was it on the market, but the entire building was on the market. And for a very brief time, I was the only person on the planet that knew that. And so I was kind of going through this little figuring this thing out process and be like, do I want this? Is this something that I want to pursue? And I was like, this is a giant dance floor. It's 3 more bars. It's a second location. It would allow us to purchase larger order capacities. Like, let's do this. So we rolled the dice. We went super big. I ended up getting an SBA loan, which is a Small Business Association guaranteed loan from the U.S. government through a local bank. And we bought a former casino property and reopened 210 North as Rise Nightclub. And we ran that for over a year and a half, and it was massively successful. Ended up having a pipe break up in the mechanical room on the roof, wiped out the building. But it was like this brief, glorious period where we were just absolutely slamming. And that was the period where I had gotten involved with the food security situation, and we had the ground floor was wide open. It was 17,000 square feet of space down there. I think maybe 15 open. Once you subtract the stairs, and I wasn't doing anything with it. Like I'm a club operator upstairs. This thing was just empty underneath. And so when this whole thing started coming down, and the mayor was like, "How do we get a grocery store in downtown Reno?" I popped up and said, "Hey, I'll donate some space. Let's just make it happen." And that turned into a bigger understanding as I started pursuing this, that the people that were asking didn't actually want that solution. They were trying to troll for like a Trader Joe's or something to come in. So they didn't actually want the community to step up and solve this problem. So inadvertently, I ended up getting into a jam with the city leaders and with other special interests in the area that didn't want a community-led solution to happen in downtown Reno. And that ended up eventually, kind of, I walked away from the whole Northern Nevada area and basically decided to relocate to Colorado. And so after I finished retiring and kind of going through that process, I had the freedom to be able to make choices. And I was like, you know what? I'm out of here. I don't need this drama. And I moved to Mexico for a year and a half. So I was actually in Mexico during COVID. That was when I started writing my book. Once I finished writing the book, I had to come back in country to file some documentation, ended up staying in Colorado and got back into advocacy. So there's actually a period where I kind of walked away from the whole thing.
Well, that's interesting that you hone in on that. There are multiple motivations at play in a society and in a government. They say that they want solutions to problems that affect people, and people want solutions to those problems because they're feeling it every day. They go hungry, they have they're lonely. Maybe they don't have the right guidance or educational resources to create some sort of talent pool so that companies can come in and provide jobs. I mean, there's all these multifaceted problems. But then when people say that they want them solved, especially if it's coming from the high to low, there might be other motivations at play as well.
Yeah, and one of the big motivations is that the people who kind of coordinate and control our communities, by and large, want solutions in place that they can control. And so when you come in, especially as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, saying, retail's not that hard, guys. Why don't we just put a couple thousand square foot room together, throw some shelves, some refrigeration, put a POS system on the front, and I'll show you guys how to lean into dry goods and fresh produce, step away from the global supply chain completely, and just create a relationship with local and regional farmers to be able to supply healthy food as basically a different business model. And it's not a new business model. It's the business model that we had for hundreds of years before supermarkets became the dominant model. So all we're doing is reverting to, hey, this is what worked back in the day. Let's do that. And let's use AI and other technologies to be able to coordinate that in ways that we couldn't have done 100 years ago. So that coordination capacity ends up making this possible as soon as we can get communities to understand that it's possible. And part of that challenge itself is something that we can address with AI. Because now, I'll tell you what we're doing right now in Kenya and in Trinidad is we're supporting local community groups to fundraise for a coordination hub so that they have Raspberry Pi workstations and servers and laptops and basically tools and Wi-Fi access and solar power and battery backup so that they have uninterrupted capacity to be able to get their hands on these tools and be able to start using them to be able to develop their messaging so that they can start actually telling their story in their own language, in their own culture, and so that they can become producers and not just passive recipients of expert aid. That's what shifts the dynamic completely. And so I see this as a complete groundbreaker for community action groups, because now I can literally take a couple of PDFs and send it your way. You can drop it into a Notebook LM, use those as source materials to be able to create primers in your own language. And now everybody in your community can have access to the same level of understanding that I have with my 30 plus years of experience. That's crazy. So it's a different shift. It's a different way to looking at it from the pure entrepreneurial approach, but it's a way of looking at community capacity building and coordination structure itself, as if we put the equipment in place, there's no other barrier to it. The expertise has gone away. The gatekeeping's gone away. You can vibe code apps. You can create your own websites just by talking to a computer now.
So when you started building capacity in the community, you mentioned this infrastructure. You mentioned shelving. You mentioned the room. You mentioned refrigeration.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned kind of educating the individual actors. Here's how you retrieve the produce. Here's how you store the produce. Here's how you sell the produce. And here's how you have a mutually beneficial financial relationship to sustain the entire model.
Right. And it's not just retail. It goes across the spectrum, and the same coordination capacity works no matter what you're doing. So let's say you're rescuing prepared meals from hotel convention centers or from cruise ships or from, hospitals or schools or any of the other places where commercial kitchens put out large volumes of food to feed a lot of people. At the end of the shift, they have to shut down the kitchen. And if the food is sitting there ready to serve at 160 degrees and above, if they put it in a regular freezer, it's going to take 10 to 12 hours to get down to a safe capacity. So bacteria will grow and makes people sick. This is why we don't have that system in place. Well, now they've come up with a proven solution in Las Vegas, where the MGM Grand Resorts perfected using blast chillers to be able to take that hot food and drop it rapidly down to frozen. Now it can be repackaged. It can be, put it as grab and go, put it out on a food truck, take it over to a local church on the weekend. Whatever you want to do with that food, it's saved. It's gotten into a storable and a transportable fashion. So that piece of equipment and understanding how to position that at the back end of the food system and how to coordinate at the end of the shift with the local rescue organization, say, hey, I got your frozen food ready for pickup in the morning, come on by. And then your volunteers understand the coordination capacity of getting it from there back over to a redistribution or tying in with the food bank. Like, that's the thing that we need to be able to coordinate. And this is the thing that we're able to do a lot more intelligently, because we can program this through agentic AI capacities.
I appreciate you said that. So it's so easy, right? It's not as hard as people think. You require some starting capital. You require a blueprint or a recipe of how this works, in practice. And then it's a function of time for people to become aware and familiar and comfortable and experts in running their own systems and seeing how the resources flow through in that local economy.
Yeah, this is key, is you're doing it without coercing the community to do what you want them to do.
It's not an imposition. It's It's a participatory model.
Yeah. And then you're inviting them to join you as a node in your network, and then you're sharing all the resources. It's all digital knowledge-based resources. And then you have the coordination capacity, because it's not just AI. Some of the coordination capacities that are coming down the pipe or that are already established and proven, like one of them is Go High Level. That is an enterprise level entrepreneurial system that is basically designed to support your entire business from, nuts to butts. And utilizing that system, and now that AI is incorporated into that system, utilizing the ability to coordinate conversations with potential bookings, partnership opportunities, private messaging, all the different things that you can do through that. What it does is it multiplies your capacity. It's what we call a force multiplier, is when you can do this, when you can do a multiple of the same amount of work with the same people. You're not eliminating jobs. What you're doing is making the existing jobs much sharper and much more potent, and giving them much more capacity to actually be useful instead of focusing them on drudgery. And so everybody becomes more impactful. Like that to me, that is the number one thing that AI does, is it allows each of us to be able to focus on the things that we actually care about and that we're actually good at, while automating the things that frankly waste a lot of our time.
And that capacity building, before you were the funnel, you were the constraint. You would have to go and have the intent to go into a community and say, hey, Joe, here's how you start ABC. Hey, Sally, here's how you use these tools. Hey, Bobby, this is the management of the system.
Yeah.
Hey, Jenny, this is how you report to regulatory compliance and make sure that everything's up to code and everything works within the bounds of your law. But now, you can infinitely scale. Well, not all at once, but depending on the amount of resources that you have available, you can encode your knowledge and use that as a means to propagate these systems. You mentioned Barbados, no, sorry, Trinidad, and you mentioned Kenya.
So, completely different situation too. So over in Kenya, you got a water insecurity situation, and a really fascinating rollout of a multi-stage filtration system with reverse osmosis, but using the card reader system to actually be able to develop a market around that, so that every family has their own account. They can pay, $4, $5 a month. It's not a lot of money, but it allows everybody to be able to buy into the system, support maintenance, which is the major problem over in the African continent and a lot of other developing nations. Is you might get some support, you might get a borehole dug, you might get some infrastructure, but unless you've got a system in place to be able to maintain it, and a system to be able to train people to be able to understand how it works, within a very short period of time, the system breaks down. Without the maintenance, without the upkeep, without new parts, you can't keep the system going. And so you've got this cycle where you constantly got aid going through, and then the aid runs out and everybody goes away, and then the whole thing breaks down, and then everybody's flat on their back again. And that's the thing that we're solving for, is to get out of that cycle and to be able to reset to a completely different level of capacity, where the people on the ground aren't depending on us for every move and for every step. Instead, you give them basic capacities and say, okay, here's your operating system. Here's all of the tools you need. Here's how you use these tools. Now go out and do great things, and go out and teach all of your other friends and your family how to do the same thing.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. You have labor, you have hands, they have needs. They have need for water, for food, for housing, for regular life materials, and there's a vacuum of opportunity within that system that they live in. But by encoding and sharing this knowledge and the tools that are required to run a system, it's sort of like you're building a franchise community. You're providing all the tools that they need to.
Anti-franchise. No, it's an anti-franchise. So we're open source. Everything.
No, I know you're open source, but I'm saying, like, you provide everything that they need out of a box, out of a Lego kit, that they just start building with it. That's what I mean by kind of like a stamped out model, operationally, intellectually, that they adopt, and you kind of jumpstart the economic process too, by giving them the tools and access to resources that plug them into the greater infrastructure. No,
fundamentally, no, none of that. So what you're coming from right there is, it's fundamentally a control perspective. So I'm going to go do this thing for you. I'm going to go fix your problem. I'm going to go save your ass. I'm going to go do whatever it is that I'm going to do for you. And that shifts the power dynamic fundamentally in to put me into like a pedestal in a power position. We don't
Okay.
want that. So we don't want that. What we want is to solve for, how do you do for you? How do you create the opportunities where you understand how to make these connections and how to connect all these dots and how to bring these stakeholders to the table and how to have these conversations in these ways so that everybody's going to be excited about the opportunity that you're presenting. And so,
Okay.
I mean, I'll give you a perfect example if you want.
No, I was just gonna say. So franchise was a dirty word. What would be a better what would be a better label for that kind of participatory cooperative
Coalition.
model?
Yeah,
Coalition.
coalition. It's a coalition of cooperatives, if you want to put it that way. So I mean, I don't. It doesn't have to, like, whoever's on the other side of the table could be a nonprofit organization. It could be a social impact group. It could be, you know, just a business that has an opportunity. Let's say it's a restaurant that opens up at 2 p.m. until the end of the night, and maybe they've got a community space that they would open up in the mornings that you could turn into a coordination hub. So you can equip that space, and now it's got, you know, it's got its Wi-Fi capacity, which the restaurant already has, so you don't have to worry about that. It's already got seats, it's already got a lot of this capacity, but now you're adding some speakers so that everybody can hear what's going on. You put a projector up in the front with a screen so everybody can see what's going on, and then you put a bunch of those Raspberry Pis out so everybody can get hands-on on the tool. So it's really just kind of handing over the keys to the kingdom. The franchise model is, I've got this proprietary operating system that
You have a license and you have to pay for it in perpetuity, and you have to be.
I've locked it in. This is
Right.
intellectual property that I own and control.
No, you're right. You're right. Sorry, that was the wrong model. The coalition, understood.
And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the franchise model. When we start getting into the waste to value systems, a lot of the things that I'll be developing as the public benefit company will be franchised. You know, when we start getting into Humasoil technology, that's going to be our licensing that we will sub-franchise out to other organizations, and we're going to have a playbook that we'll develop to show people how to do this. But down at this core coordination level, the just hooking people up with capacity, giving them the understanding of how to use their Google account to lock into these different tools and what each of these tools means, is such a huge process for people. Because, I mean, some of the stuff that's come down the pipe is insane. Have you seen anti-gravity yet?
No.
Oh my God. So Google 3.0 just dropped with anti-gravity. I mean, N8N, I don't even know what's going to happen with that, but like basically they internalized the entire app development process from stack to back. And it's all vibe code now, and it's all auto API, and it's all like, it's just getting easier. It's getting seamless. And so now the breakthrough is, do you even know this exists? Because if you do, you have the tools. It's there.
One thing we've brought up in previous conversations has been there are communities that are impoverished of resources, of infrastructure, and what you're proposing in this discussion is handing them the keys to the kingdom, handing them the keys to plug into the world economy. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so it's quite literally, okay, so let's put it this way. If I was stuck in a refugee camp in eastern Kenya, which is Kakuma refugee camp is the one that I'm communicating with, so I'm going to pick on them. If I was in a refugee camp with all of the knowledge and background that I've got, and I needed to put together a coordination facility or coordination resource so that we could effectively communicate our needs to the world and get support from our families overseas and be able to help people to understand what exactly the situation was, what the assets that we have, what the needs are, and how to connect those resources, the first thing that I would do is identify a local community space, someplace that we got a building, you know, maybe it's in a church, maybe it's a school on a Saturday or something like that. Or it actually, because it does that double duty as educational resource, a school is the preferred place to go. You're already connected with kids. You already got the women coming in, everything like that. That's the system. Find yourself a 20 by 30 foot room that you can get 20 or 30 people into. Get yourself a Starlink account for 12 months. Get yourself a server with 20 Raspberry Pis attached to it, just with basic understanding of you know, we can start building lesson plans, develop an LM count, do all those things. 1 or 2 backup laptops, solar power sufficient to be able to run the facility with battery backup so that it's completely sovereign from the existing grid. That's what I'm talking about with a coordination hub. Now, when you're talking to people and coordinating your water security or your food security initiative, you don't have dropped calls. You've got the ability to actually look at the same screen and be able to talk about the same thing. You don't have people sitting in the dark. I mean, those are the basics. It's like being in a war zone everywhere we go to talk to people because of that lack of capacity. So this is that zero level foundation that allows everybody to just get hands on the tools, to be able to actually see what we're talking about, watch the videos together, and then be able to communicate and coordinate on the ground. Here's the thing a lot of people don't understand is that the folks that we're talking on the ground to are really smart people. They've got decades of experience in agriculture. They've got decades of experience in engineering in a lot of cases. They've got connections with local and regional higher education facilities. They're not disconnected, but they don't have the resources to actually coordinate where they're at. And a lot of times they're on the road all day. And a lot of times they're struggling to try and make meetings while they're trying to also, hoof it. Or maybe they're trying to catch a Wi-Fi signal off the back of a closed building at 2:00 in the morning in the back alley to try and meet up with somebody in the US or the UK that's trying to help. And so it's that need for asynchronous coordination. It's that need for them to be able to act independently from the advisors and supporters that are trying to make a difference. That's the key. That's the through line.
So let's go back to those examples. No, that's great. I love it. This is why we're having this discussion, because I wanted you to channel that passion and explain to other people what it is that you're doing and how pragmatic it can be. You don't need to go and raise $1 bajillion. You don't need to go and build a school, a church, a hospital. You don't have to go do all like major investments of time, energy, and an individual can have a significant impact should they know what is the most viable way to engage this kind of problem set. Yeah. So, you're making it the solution accessible through coalition building, not franchising, coalition building.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about these two examples that you brought up on how to potentially retool a local community in Trinidad and in Kenya. Let's start with Trinidad.
All right, so Trinidad's interesting. So when I first started co-founding Regenerative Impact Alliance, what had happened was me and a bunch of impact professionals had been talking, just people from all over the world. I was getting into some groups. I had started pivoting away from the Denver area after realizing that this had kind of similar challenges from Northern Nevada in many ways. And I was really starting to look for fertile territories, like, hey, who's actually interested in solving these challenges? Who doesn't have existing infrastructure or existing like industries that basically see a competitive threat with any change in our system, because that was the problem that we kept running into over and over again. And so I was talking to a couple of professionals, and this one guy, Barry Tate, is friends with a guy named Lionel Suturin over in Trinidad, who's a waste to value specialist. He takes trees, they get cut down from windfall, like hurricanes, that kind of thing, and he turns it into mulch, and then he passes it around the community. He's got a whole business he's been doing for years on that. And he's been getting approached from basically suppliers, manufacturers, food producers, paper manufacturers, all kinds of different people that have organic waste of different types, saying, hey, we need to get rid of this waste too. And he's like, I don't know what to do with any of this stuff. All he knows is this is how you mulch stuff. And so I started talking to him about this strategy, this development that's been coming out of Australia since the late 90s called Humisoil. This company, VRM Biologic, they identified a bacteria in the Amazon jungle, is the story that I understand, and was able to harness this bacteria to be able to rapidly convert any organic matter into a high quality topsoil they call Humisoil. And this stuff has a particular quality that is kind of unique in the world. It uses bacterial photosynthesis. So kind of like plant photosynthesis takes sunlight and converts it into nutrients, and then it converts it into oxygen. Well, this instead converts the end product into H2O, into water. And so it actually grows water in the soil. And so, which is a big deal if you're out here in the Southwest US, where we've got wildfires raging from dry territory. We've got drought situations where, we're basically running out of water and we're struggling, and climate change is advancing those problems. So we're in kind of a nexus point where something like this is really, really critically important, but we're struggling because the existing composting industries and other industries see basically a competitive threat with these new products and services that are coming out on the market that actually compete with their sunk costs, because they got millions of dollars invested in composting processes. So this is actually retarding growth in areas like the US and like developed nations. Meanwhile, over in Southeast Asia, down in South America, 32 countries and counting, this thing's blowing up all over the place. In the UAE, they got tons of case studies. It's a huge proven thing. And so what we're doing is basically taking this knowledge and this understanding and bringing it out as a coalition approach, saying, hey, if we get all the farmers and all the food producers and all of the fire mitigation specialists and all of the urban planners and parks departments and everybody that's producing waste and everybody that needs topsoil, and we start just identifying all of those links, we build a market. Now we just bring this process in. We license the production capacity so that we can grow this in country. We start taking all of the sources, building piles and inoculating them and turning them into this humisoil, and then doling it out as topsoil amendments on the farmland around the area. Now you've got a reduction in irrigation needs by between 30 and 60%, while also increasing the health of the soil and reducing the need for exterior like chemical fertilizer inputs. So you're creating a circularity engine using this topsoil amendment that actually turns your waste into a mechanism for restoring soil. That's huge.
And one thing to note is, like, how did these communities get to this point where their soil is barren, unable to hold and retain water or nourish a diverse set of flora, right? Different plant species.
That's an island thing. Like, if you look at all of the islands, look over at Hawaii, talk to anybody over there, it's the same problem. Conventional farming practices plus limited
monocrop, maximum extraction, no way to
overuse. Just not doing grazing practices. Like there's regenerative processes like agriforestry, silvopasturing, even agrivoltaics, which is having crops underneath solar panels. That's a great thing, and that's something that you can get up to 160% from studies that I've read. 160% of capacity off the same land, because you're pulling your solar power and you're still growing crops like shade tolerant crops. You got sheep going under and foraging, whatever it is that you're doing. And so those type of alignments, and again, having that AI capacity and understanding how to be able to see what our resources are. Here's what the land looks like. Here's some pictures. Now you can start mapping out all these resources into what actually makes sense for our area.
In kindergarten class, my mother-in-law, she's a preschool teacher, so I sometimes steal her books and read through them and put them back. But there's a concept of learning centers where you provide the tools and you provide some simplistic set of instructions for children to go into different physical areas that they can then pick up and play with and do things in that tool to build a confidence to then be self-sufficient and do more complex experimentation and things like that, like a drawing center or a reading corner or whatever. So what you're describing to me is the equivalent, but for adults working within their community and actually contributing to a greater whole.
So and kids too. I mean, digital fluency, like this is where we're at right now. And the people that get hands-on right now and the people that don't get left behind by this first wave and the people that can take advantage of the free tools that are out there. Like, I mean, I think people underestimate the impact of the reality that some extremely powerful AI models are open source. Like, it's not just OpenAI. It's not just, the big boys that get the news. There are open source models out there that anybody can get their hands on. And now Google has joined the game and made open source models that are literally leading the pack. And this competition is healthy, and it's a great thing that we've got that, because now we've got the opportunity for open source to essentially keep pace with corporate advances.
Open source knowledge, centers of excellence, coordination facilities, as you described. I think that's really cool. And
some groups have actually figured out how to get as much or more processing power without using as robust chipsets even. So they're figuring out how to reduce the energy usage. They're figuring, so people are creative. That's what we do. We're real clever monkeys, and we figure out new ways to do things.
It's also interesting that you describe these problems that are a result of industrialization. you know, but if you look at all the different areas that are being impacted, if you reclaim the air quotes waste products from industrialized um, processes, like, fertilizers or food production, everybody does an excess amount of stuff. If there's a way for somebody to transform and input that into other areas, other industries, you get to reclaim some of that waste and repurpose it as a value added product. You said food can be turned into fertilizer, it could be fermented, it could be put into the soil. There are intermediary processes that make it available for the local biome, the local soil system to kind of absorb and break down any other rich kind of component. But that is like you're giving the keys to build an entire ecosystem.
We're doing even more than that, though. We're giving them ideas. So one of the things that we can do, like this process you're laying out, is exactly what we're talking about. And we're talking about having this flexibility to be able to understand what's appropriate for different situations. So you can lay out your scenario. Like I can create an agentic gem through Google's program that helps you onboard through a process. It'll give you, like, 10 or 15 question surveys, like, hey, what's your situations, what's your assets, what have you tried already that hasn't worked, kind of go through that process of getting to know you a little bit. We'll run your entire backstory and your sequence through our systems so that you can then have a kind of a menu of options. Like, okay, these are some directions we can go. Here's some ideas maybe you haven't thought of before. Hey, here's some organizations you might want to connect with because they might have the capacity that you're looking for. And here's some transformational tools over here that work. And here's some case studies so that you can now get the grants or you can get the investor support that you need in order to be able to build those in your area. And so it's really all about, kind of all of the different processes, because funding is a huge part of this. One of the things that everybody's kind of circling the drain around, especially now when we're seeing the instability in the global supply chains, when we're seeing the tariff wars, when we're seeing, the defunding of US aid and so many other organizations that traditionally have formed the foundation of the safety net globally. Now we have to get really creative about how do we start accessing resources? How do we start accessing funding in order to be able to start moving the needle when these traditional systems are breaking down? And so one of the things that we don't really spend a lot of energy leaning into is diaspora family members. One of the statistics that absolutely blows my mind is that $55 billion a year goes into the African continent in remittances from family members just to, like, pay rent and buy food and get bottled water. And it's closer to 155 billion in the Caribbean. And so these diaspora investors, this is like your aunt that lives in Miami. This is a cousin that grew up down in, in South Florida or something like that they've got family back home. They want to take care of everybody. They're working jobs, they're doing the thing. And all we have to do is put the message out that, hey, we've got this coordination capacity that's going to allow this village and this refugee camp to be able to coordinate together for a regional waste to value strategy that's going to eventually bring in over $10 million in production value into the region. And you can be a part of that, and you can be a part of supporting your community. And here's the step-by-step process. And here's the AI generated primers and explainer videos. And here's the debate thing and the critique thing that you can pull in so you can get all the different angles, and everybody can really kind of chew on it to their heart's content. And that way, when you got grandma coming in and the 12-year-old kid is like explaining to grandma what exactly is going on or what they learned in class today, and grandma turns that around and takes it over to her sister that moved to Australia 3 years ago. And then she reaches out to their network. And now you got 1,000 people kicking around. Holy crap, look what's going on down there. That link's going to be on fire. And then once we prove that, and once we show that we're able to execute on what we promise, and you get the coordination hub in place, and you've got folks sitting there with workstations, developing videos, developing imagery, developing, social media post fluency, and actually being able to get those skills that they need to be able to operate on the international job market, while at the same time coordinating for water security. Now we're getting into round two. And now people are going to get excited because they're like, holy shit, what are these guys going to do when they get 300,000? And then we get the emergency water system in place, and we show that work, and then we replicate it a couple of times, start working towards the major investment. And now we're looking at humus in the area. Now we're looking at processing facilities with a commercial kitchen, so that with ice that they're producing, so people can take the harvest home and we don't waste as much food in the area.
In Trinidad, you mentioned just to tie it off and then go into Kenya. You mentioned that there are these cruises that have these industrial food production. Sometimes that excess leads to waste, and they these cruise ships pay to have that waste be
Yeah.
disposed in a safe manner. So you're actually creating a means for these local communities to reclaim the food to consume locally or introduce into the local economy or use to enrich the soil. Is this
So, okay, so we're talking about two different processes.
okay?
So,
Okay.
so the okay, and first of all, I'm not creating these. So we need to go to the case study, which in this case is the MGM Grand and Three Square in Las Vegas, because they're the ones that kind of invented this process.
Okay.
And
Thanks for
what I'm doing is translating it into different scenarios. So on the
okay.
island scenario, what we're looking at is, I mean, every island around the world virtually is got some sort of cruise ship thing. It's got some sort of hotel resort thing. It's got lots of people getting fed. Like that's kind of the standard model if you look around. And so traditionally, when the hotels don't have really a connection with the community, and again, we've got this safety thing. And so it becomes a reputation thing. It becomes a marketing concern. It becomes, hey, I don't want to get involved with food rescue because what if somebody gets sick? And we don't have mechanisms in place and it's not approved and there's no channels. And so that stops corporations from wanting to get involved with programs like this. That's the thing that really kind of prevents this from happening. So what we do is reverse the process and we show community groups this is how you approach your health department, and you walk them through this strategy and you introduce here's the case studies, here's how it's working over there, here's how we're going to do it here, and you show them the temperature gauging, and this is how we're going to track the temperature, and this is how we're going to keep the food safe, and this is how we're going to maintain this positive chain of custody of the food, and this is how we're going to put it on the blockchain, and this is how we're going to put the whole system in place so that the corporations and the customer, and the community are all comfortable that this is value, that this is healthy food. And then we just implement the process, and we get the kitchen manager in the line, and the kitchen manager's got the phone number. Hey, I got 10 hotel pans of food for you to pick up. I just hit start, so it'll be ready for you, rock solid frozen in 90 minutes. And that's the end of the night, so it just stays in there overnight. They come by at 8 o'clock the next morning and they pick up their food, and that's catching it before it hits the ground, so it doesn't have to go through compost. It's a prepared meal.
Right.
All you got to do is chop it up, put it in. Let's say you got a hotel pan of fried chicken, one of mashed potatoes, and one of green beans. So you drop it down to refrigerated, turn the machine off, take it out, reportion it into family meals, put it back in, then freeze it. Or take the whole hotel pan, freeze it, take it over to a church, put it into a rethermalizer or into the oven, reheat it back up to service temperature, and serve it. It's so flexible once you solve that one problem. You're basically treating the heat like the Panama Canal. If you can drop that lock fast enough and get it down there inside the safe zone, you're home free. And think about the sheer quantity of food we're talking about. The grocery store, the supermarket industry in the United States, just to give you an example, wastes so much food that the entire food bank industry was developed to deal with that food specifically. And that industry, that sector, the food bank sector, spends approximately 1% of our gross domestic product as the United States every single year. Just moving food waste from supermarkets back into communities. They're not touching restaurant food, and there's damn near as close as much restaurant food.
There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste.
Yeah,
I've been in catering, and I've been a part of dumping with a tear in my eye, vast quantities of food.
Yeah,
and dragging multitude of garbage bags to the dumpster.
Yeah, and we don't even know how much food we're talking about. We're not even tracking that out of restaurants, but it's millions of tons every year. I mean, globally, it's insane. And so the key isn't to get this giant, we're going to make this giant organization that's going to go solve all the problems. The key is to just hand the keys over to local communities and say, here's the source. Go to webstaurantstore.com, or find one in Asia, or find one in Africa, or find one in South America that's producing pretty much the same equipment, because it's all off-the-shelf solutions that have been around since the 1920s. This isn't new stuff. It's just the coordination strategy is new. The putting together the kitchen manager with the food bank, with the volunteer network, with here's the hot box that you use to transport it to keep temperature. And that's all it is just understanding how to keep the food safe. And then the Humisoil technology comes around if you don't catch it before it hits the ground. If you don't want to serve it to somebody, if it's too far gone, it becomes compost. But instead of going through traditional compost, we use this bacteriological process. Now we're incorporating this drought resistance situation in. Now we're incorporating a fire mitigation element into the soil itself, because if it holds more moisture, if it's more wet, it's not going to be as prone to catch fire. The trees are not going to be as prone to catch fire as well. And on top of that, you're using less of the irrigation needs to be able to bring water over to the soil. Imagine being able to use 60% less water to grow your crops in Africa, in the Caribbean, in any island situation, in Southwest US, in Texas, here in Colorado. It's something we need everywhere, but it's isolated in little pockets because it's basically just an entrepreneurial push right now. And we're coming at it as a coalition. How do we leverage this master licensing to be able to incorporate this as a mobile solution? How do we develop this in Trinidad and put it on a boat so that we can deal with the entire archipelago, instead of having to have 49 different solutions?
I don't think we're gonna get to evaluate and examine the Kenya example, but I welcome you to tell people. Yeah, I welcome you to tell people how they should get in contact with you, how you can interact with them, and how you can cooperate in a coalition to bring some of these solutions to fruition.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the Regenerative Impact Alliance, first of all, is our nonprofit organization. If you're interested in learning about us, it's ria.earth, EARTH. We're using one of the Web3 things, so we don't have to do the .org thing anymore. And if you do ria.earth/donate, you'll actually be able to contribute to our holiday campaign to be able to equip Sori Village in Kenya and Kakuma Refugee Camp with coordination hubs so that we can start this process. And we're basically proving the work right now.
I didn't find an appropriate time to introduce this, but there are two people that were actively contributing in the chat, Michael Wagoner and another gentleman. His name is Joshua A. Harbrink. So, if you're listening still, I welcome you to reach out directly to Shannon. Otherwise, Shannon, I invite you to go and talk to them. It looks like you guys are running on the same wavelength. So
Joshua Harbrink is actually one of the fellows that turned me on to Humasoil. And he's my development, not partner yet, but alignment in Washington State. And we're working on a tri-state rollout of the Humasoil technology in different capacities. So we got his buddy down in Texas as the third edge of this wheel.
Awesome. Well, there you go. Anything you think might be a set of encouraging words for people that are looking to break into the space or find ways to be proactive in helping, solve some of these larger problems?
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest motivational thing is that the tools and the strategies that you need to solve the problems in your community have most likely already been solved by some community using something that you've never heard of. And really coming at this with an abundance mentality and understanding that we have all the resources we need. We just need to be able to connect the dots between the resources and the people that need them. And that's the coordination strategy. And it's not as hard as people think. Especially if we start being able to approach through the loading docks and create business to business relationships within existing legal frameworks instead of having policy battles all the time, that actually facilitates an entirely different approach to these strategies that we haven't really, as a planet, explored yet. Step away from the whole sustainability thing. Let's start looking through the departmental manager with discretionary funding for vendor approaches for what to do with their food at the end of the day. It's a completely different conversation, and it goes through completely different channels. That's a huge one right there. It's just, who we're talking to needs to change.
We are only subject to world hunger because we want to, not because we have to. The resources are there.
Yeah, we got to change the rules of the game. I mean, honestly, it's not even changing the rules of the game. It's understanding the rules of the game, because
playing it better, playing it more.
Yeah, if we could get people to understand one fundamental truth, that laws exist in order to be able to provide the playing field for us to be able to do business and to be able to interact as a society. And once the laws are in place, we can do whatever's legal, whatever's inside that rule book is okay to do. And so the business to business, the vendor relationship, being able to develop operations and creating these connections at that level actually becomes the fundamental way for us to interact while getting past the logger jams and the dysfunction at the policy level. Just find that existing through path. The health department, again, waste to value coming through rural communities instead of through cities, so that you've got that right to farm sovereignty going on, and it's stepping out of the dysfunction, finding the place with the least amount of jurisdiction and the strongest positioning for what it is that you're trying to do. Put the headquarters there. If you're a farmer, you don't have to stop at the edge of your farm. You can develop a retail store by taking over a restaurant space in a low-income urban community and just develop a farmer's market right there, and just have local community groups that are already living in the area staff the place. And now you've got education and skills training, and you retool the commercial kitchen into a last mile food rescue, and you're creating miniature hubs of this entire design everywhere. And if you get 5 or 6 of those around a city, now you create a nexus with a large scale commercial kitchen and warehousing on the back end. And you've got a full logistics system for a retail, like a regional distribution. And then if you double duty that commercial kitchen as food rescue at a higher level, now you're getting into industrial scale rescue. I mean, see how it all works together. You just got to kind of like work your way. Okay, which way?
And you could stack it. You could stack these initiatives one after the other, build confidence, gather resources, train the individuals.
Yeah, that's why I call it the Nexus and Node system, because you can have the Nexus, which is like your back-end logistics resource. The nodes go out into communities, and they're basically independent nodes, but they've got that logistics back-end. And that's how the major corporations work. But we can do this with independent community ownership just through coordination.
Carolina Johnson is saying, my same approach with math and technology. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We have all the solutions at our fingertips. We just need to know how to use them. So with that, Shannon, thank you for your time. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Always an awesome conversation, Joaquin. Thank you so much.